Welcome back to CBS Sports HQ, presented by Canva. Love your work. Week 11 of the NFL season begins tonight on Thursday Night Football. It's the Eagles and Commanders. And for all you fantasy owners out there wondering who you should start or sit this week, Jamie Eisenberg has one guy for you. How about Broncos quarterback Bo Nix as they face Kirko Chains is what we're calling him, I guess Lee says, Jamie, and you have them as a start this week. For more starts and sits, let's turn things over to our fantasy experts. Guys, take it away.
Is that Broncos orange, too, that you're wearing? I think, you know,
a little biased, I don't know.
In honor of Bo Nix, I like that.
I planned it.
Look, he needs all the help he can get because it's not a lot of, I think, fantasy managers are going to say, I'm going to start Bo Nix and I'm going to start him with confidence. I'm going to start Bo Nix and I'm going to start him with confidence, Dave. I like the setup for him against the Falcons. They've been bleeding fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, number 7 in terms of most fantasy points allowed to the position. And it's been 4 quarterbacks in a row that have done this against the Falcons, and it hasn't exactly been murderer's row of quarterbacks. Geno Smith, for example, we saw Baker Mayfield do it in that 4-game stretch. Bo Nix has scored 20 or more fantasy points in 4 of his last 6 games. I like the fact that you'll get some production on the ground from him based on what we've seen during the stretch. He's got either a rushing touchdown or 60 yards on the ground in this 6-game span. And I just think he's playing well enough right now in this matchup at home that I like the setup for him. Going into Arrowhead last week, 20 fantasy points. That's not an easy place to play against a tough defense, 22 of 30, 215, 2 passing touchdowns. I think right now he's easily the second best rookie quarterback. We'll see what happens this week. Maybe by the end of the season, he's the best rookie quarterback. He's coming for you, Jane Daniels. Wow. It's been that nice of a season for Bo Nix right now.
You know, I like him as a starter. I think he's awesome as a bye week replacement. I can't go as far as you go where you're starting him with confidence because I'm a little bit worried, not so much about the matchup, but just what we've seen from him over the balance of more than half the season. There's been 2 games this year where he took on Carolina and Vegas, terrible defenses, monster games. In the more competitive matchups that he's had, certainly 2 of the more recent ones, he's gotten over 20 fantasy points. One of them was 20.1. The other one was like 24 something. It was against the Chargers. That was the good game. I think that's the kind of game you're looking for, and I'm looking for the game like he had last week where he does just enough to get you over the 20-point hump. A good fantasy quarterback, not a great fantasy quarterback, and with so many other guys that are out there, I'm happy to kind of put players like Jordan Love, Jared Goff, Darnold still significantly ahead, and Justin Herbert too, ahead of Bo Nix.
Yeah, the only one I consider, the 2 would be Justin Herbert and Jared Goff. I don't think that Sam Darnold's going to play at the same level of Bo Nix. I think Darnold's trending, unfortunately, in the wrong direction, as we saw last week. All right, let's talk about Justin Herbert. He's on one of the starts for me for this week, taking on that Cincinnati defense, which is number 5 in most fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. You got DeAndre Swift, Cortland Sutton. Obviously, I'm going to like Bo Nix. I'm going to like Cortland Sutton. Cedric Tillman, 18-plus PPR points in 3 games in a row. Hopefully doesn't slow down off the bye week. And we'll talk about Calvin Ridley in a second. But let's stick with Herbert here. 22.6 fantasy points or more in 21.8 fantasy points or more in 3 games in a row. And Cincinnati, number 5 in terms of most fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. So what I think we'll see from Herbert is hopefully more than the 18 pass attempts, and that speaks really more to the Bengals offense showing up, which hopefully will be the case that they put up a big number. We really haven't seen the Chargers in a back and forth chasing points type of scenario where Herbert's been throwing the ball a lot, and I think they're going to struggle to run the ball to the same level because this Bengals run defense has actually gotten much better against the run since they've gotten healthier with their defensive front. So it could be a little bit of a tough game for J.K. Dobbins, hopefully a lot of Justin Herbert, and he's run for at least 32 yards in 2 of his past 3 games. Dave, in terms of Calvin Ridley, I've been very hesitant to say start him. I've been hesitant to recommend people starting him, but you got to buy into what he's done. 22.6 fantasy PPR points in 2 of his last 3 games, and you saw the game with Will Levis. That's what I was waiting to see. Okay, Will Levis comes back from the shoulder injury. Will they play at a high level? Well, he gets the big touchdown in the first drive, and then he gets the garbage time touchdown. That's what we're probably going to see from the Titans. Staying competitive in the first quarter.
And then lots of trash.
And then lots of chasing points from this team. So I like the setup for Calvin Ridley as a number 2 receiver. I adjusted my ranking this morning. Originally, I had him as a number 1 receiver just because facing a Minnesota defense that is number 2 in most fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers. So matchup is good. Hopefully quarterback play is good. Targets have been fantastic. At least 8 targets in 5 games in a row. So hopefully that's something that will continue.
Well, it's that volume that really matters. And Levis, definitely there were some timing and accuracy issues throwing to Calvin Ridley last week. I know, but we will see so much volume go Ridley's way. And you mentioned it. The Vikings, bottom 3 in PPR points per game allowed to wide receivers. It's especially wide receivers that line up wide like Ridley tends to do that put up huge points against Minnesota. I'm with you on Calvin Ridley.
And when he's not facing a lockdown corner, he typically performs at a much higher level. The Vikings defense is good. They just do not have a guy that will shut down Calvin Ridley like some teams do. All right, let's talk about your starts, Dave. Here you got Russell Wilson on the list, J.K. Dobbins, Nick Chubb, Jacoby Myers, and T.J. Hawkinson. In terms of Russell Wilson, he's been really good in 2 of 3 starts for Pittsburgh. Statistically, he's been really good overall in those 3 games. Are you expecting him to continue that against the Ravens?
Yeah, and here's the thing. The Ravens allow the league most 294.9 pass yards per game. They are bottom 5 in yards per pass attempt allowed, and they're the best in the league in rush yards per game allowed at 73. What do you think the Steelers are going to do? Do you think they're really going to plunge Najee Harris into the line 25 times? I don't think it's going to happen. They've got to have confidence in Russell Wilson just as much. They probably have more confidence in Russell Wilson now than they did when they initially first put him in. He should have 3 games with over 20 fantasy points. He just has 2 in his past 3. This is going to be another one, 25 or more fantasy points to 5 of the last 6 quarterbacks that the Ravens have faced. This secondary is in trouble. This pass rush isn't what it used to be. We're going to see a nice game from Russell Wilson, and he's another quarterback that I would start ahead of Bo Nix.
Okay, I'm going to take Bo Nix. I just think there's a higher ceiling even in a the matchups are both similar here. Yeah, because Nix, what he'll do on the ground will supersede what Russell Wilson will do. The one thing I'm concerned about Russell Wilson is these 2 teams know each other so well, and they study each other so well. They're almost mirror images of each other based on how the history has gone in this rivalry. If he's not getting these moonball plays that have been jump ball 50-50 situations. I mean, George Pickens saved him on the first touchdown. I don't know what Dan Quinn was doing on the Mike Williams touchdown.
He was blitzing him.
Why? Because that was the stupidest decision to make.
It happened.
Harbaugh's not going to do that. The Ravens aren't going to do that. And so if he doesn't get these big plays, can he survive? Because he doesn't throw in the middle of the field. The one thing that I like about this is, you said it, no run game. We may see season high in attempts for Russell Wilson.
I think we will too.
Which will hopefully help him. But it would not surprise me, though, if the Ravens come to play in this game defensively for the first time and make things comfortable. Kyle Hamilton's injury, though, is one to watch for sure.
That's a big one.
I love the setup for Nick Chubb taking on the Saints. He's on your start list here. How high do you think, how well do you think Nick Chubb's, not even your top 20?
No, he's not in my top 20, and I'm a little hesitant. And remember, this is PPR, and we know that Nick Chubb doesn't catch a lot of passes.
This is a 2-touchdown game for him.
I hope it is, and everybody's kind of rooting for that except for the people that are playing against Nick Chubb. Guess who has the worst run defense in the National Football League? I just told you that the Ravens had the best. It's the Saints right now, statistically anyway. 5.2 yards per carry to running backs on the year. 10 total touchdowns to running backs, 9 rushing in their last 5 games. And here's another fun stat. Of the 8 running backs with at least 14 carries against New Orleans this season, all of them have at least 1 touchdown. 6 of them have at least 80 yards. If he gets you 80 yards and a touchdown, you will be a happy camper, more so in non-PPR and half PPR than full PPR leagues. But I'm really hoping that Nick Chubb is back to his old self. Remember, coming off of a bye, feeling a little more restful. Hopefully he's a little more explosive, and the matchup is just tremendous for him.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be back to his old self, but he doesn't have to be, he just has to be what every running back against the Saints has been. He was nearly my start of the week. There aren't enough running backs for me to use to fill out the column because everybody's starting all these guys that are typically been healthy. But I like the setup for Nick Chubb so much. I'm starting him over Dobbins. I'm starting him over James Cook. I'm starting him over Tony Pollard.
Wow, James Cook is huge.
Terrible matchup. The Chiefs are awful to run against.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
Much better situation, and James Cook not involved in the passing game lately. So I like the setup for Nick Chubb just a little bit more. All right, let's talk about the sits for you and the guys that you're looking to avoid here. Najee Harris taking on that tough run defense. DeAndre Hopkins, Josh Downs, Brian Thomas Jr., and DJ Moore. Understandably, the quarterback situations for those receivers not named DeAndre Hopkins are not necessarily great for the receivers, with Anthony Richardson coming back for the Colts, Mac Jones starting for the Jaguars, and Caleb Williams, maybe the coordinator change helps him. We'll see how that goes for DJ Moore. But let's start with the Josh Downs conversation here, because the last time we saw Downs and Richardson, it was a great game. It was against Houston. It was 4 catches, 108 yards, and a touchdown.
Yeah.
And really the magic number was 9 targets. You don't think he's going to have the same success against the Jets?
I don't know how much passing the Colts are going to do. Going back to Anthony Richardson, I think the timing is smart. Certainly, if they're comfortable with Anthony Richardson back under center, that means something. But you know how bad the Jets are against running quarterbacks. And we saw it last week with Kyler Murray. We've seen it 5 straight weeks with quarterbacks that aren't even 4 or 5.
Yeah, CJ Stroud did not run.
But he did. He had like 50 yards rushing in that game. So this is a defense that already struggles to tackle anyway. And now here comes Anthony Richardson. What's the one thing that I think we can count on Anthony Richardson doing?
I hope so.
Running the ball, not throwing the ball very much. And if you take away that one busted play that he had against Houston that was from Richardson on that game, he still had under 10 PPR points. That's what he had in his other games with Anthony Richardson this year. So I love the talent. I would love to see him get a lot of targets. I don't think he's going to get it this week. I'm going to try and stay away from Josh Downs, even in full PPR.
DeAndre Hopkins has played 3 games with the Chiefs, and one of those was against Tampa Bay, and he was a monster. The other 2, throw out the first one if you want to against the Raiders.
Right, because he didn't play that much in it.
But then last week got Patrick Surtain. So there's really not a good gauge of what DeAndre Hopkins can do, but I think we both agree we're going to try and sit him this week.
5 wide receivers have had 15 or more PPR points against the Buffalo Bills all season, and one of them was last week, and it was Alec Pierce, and it took a jump ball in the end zone in total garbage time for him to get over 15 PPR points. This is a tough matchup with a capital T for DeAndre Hopkins, and I would have bought into Hopkins a lot more if he had another big game last week, if he had really taken the Broncos defense and made them look bad. He didn't do it, and that just tells me that he's still the same type of older receiver, savvy veteran, great hands, not a great route runner, and not necessarily somebody who's going to see a ton of volume and a ton of catches from week to week. He is out of my top 24. He is barely a number 3 wide receiver.
All right, so he's on the sit list for you. He's on the sit list for me as well, along with a pair of Falcons and Kirk Cousins and Drake London. And we know the setup here as they're taking on a very tough defense of the Denver Broncos. Quarterbacks do not have success against the Broncos. Certainly number 1 wide receivers do not have success against the Broncos. For Cousins, he's had 4 good games this season. 2 of them come against Tampa Bay. So he's an easy quarterback, I think, to sit this week. We'll see how much he throws in this matchup. Could be a lot of Bijan Robinson running the ball in this game against Denver. For London, it's very difficult to sit a receiver of his caliber, but you know the matchup. It's Patrick Surtain, and what he does against big physical wide receivers like this, it could be frustrating for London. Now, we've been having this conversation on our Fantasy Football Today podcast quite a bit. They have 2 Pro Bowl caliber wide receivers. Darnell Mooney's having a fantastic season. Drake London is having a fantastic season. Will they just keep Surtain on one side and just try to take away that specific player?
Matter. I know that sounds silly, but it doesn't matter. Well, that Broncos secondary, Riley Moss and McMillan, their other slot corners,
they're not Surtain. But they're not
well.
Surtain, though.
They're all playing really well.
If you were to tell me right now, Surtain is not traveling with if Surtain is not traveling with Drake London, he is a top 5 wide receiver. With Surtain traveling with Drake London, he is a barely number 2 wide receiver because what he's done against DK Metcalf, against Garrett Wilson, against Mike Evans, against DeAndre Hopkins last week, it's 10 PPR points or less, and I think that's where Drake London's going to be. So I would try to sit him this week if you can. More of a low-end number 2 wide receiver. Not a lot of great wide receivers this week, so probably still going to be in your lineups, but unfortunately, could be a tough game for him. All right, make sure you check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast. Wherever podcasts are found, we're helping you dominate your fantasy leagues, and we do it better than anybody else. Scan the QR code to make it easy on yourself, and check us out on YouTube as well, the Fantasy Football Today podcast.